This is the fourth tape, the fourth video I'm making as Swami Kundalini Ananda to support the book 21 Levels to Nirvana. And I want to talk about the levels, some of the really difficult transitions that seem to be part of the structure of the 21 levels. So let's start with the first difficult level, and the first difficult level is, of course, the trying to adjust the camera. The first difficult level is, of course, going from 4 to 5. And the reason why this is difficult is because it requires a different way of thinking. It requires mental strength for sure, but also a willingness to change. So the mental strength has to be available to allow you to think in new ways. And of course the key over here is the work that you have been doing on your ego. We spoke about tearing out the leaves, ripping off the leaves and sawing off the branches or chopping off the branches and so on. And of course, when you're working from level 0 to level 4, you're not doing much sawing, and you're certainly not doing much chopping. You're basically just tearing off the leaves and the twigs, and maybe some of the weak new branches, depending on your strength. So the point being that when you come to 4, you cannot graduate to 5 unless you've done the hard work of getting your ego under some level of control. Otherwise the ego will fool you. The ego will make this step from 4 to 5 look almost impossible. Or the ego is clever enough to convince you that you're already at 5 and you don't need to change. And of course this is a trap, and this is a very common trap, that why do I need to change? I'm already so realized, I'm already so mature. I must be at level 5 already. But if you have not developed the brutal honesty, brutal honesty, unless you're very, very strict with yourself, if you've not developed the brutal honesty and you've not developed the skill in seeing through the ego's tricks, then it becomes difficult to graduate from 4 to 5. The reason why 5 is such a special aura level is because it's the opening of the heart chakra. So, quite literally, the chakras below the heart chakras are all animalistic, instinctual, egotistical levels, where the being is not analyzing himself or herself, where sometimes the being cannot see himself or herself and just takes it for granted that I am who I am. I am this person, and neither can I choose to change it, nor do I want to. But at 5, I think the opening of the heart chakra is symbolic of a deeper awareness. And I myself call it as coming to terms with the emotions. As you know, the undifferentiated human being is ruled by his or her emotions primarily. The instincts tell us what to do, but the emotions is what makes us do it. And so how are these emotions created? How are they to be handled? How can they be handled? How can you become more aware of them? And seeing the connection between where do these emotions come from? Seeing the connection, that why do these emotions arise? And in other words, you have to explore your emotions. And once you open the heart chakra, this becomes much easier, more established. The work that you have done till that time becomes established or becomes firm. You get a firm foundation. But unfortunately, 5 is not a watershed in the true sense of the word, a watershed level, because you can go down. In other words, even if you go to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9.5, 9.9, you can yet go back down to 0. It's something like snake and ladders, and you're not going to get the benefit of the safety net at 5. 5 is not a watershed in that sense. It's a major breakthrough on the way up, but it doesn't stop you when you're going down. And in fact, I know of a particular guru who was very much in the news and became quite famous in India. And but I always used to, when I saw him on TV, I used to feel a little uncomfortable, because he was at 9.5 or 9.5, and I couldn't understand why he didn't or couldn't make the extra effort to get to 10. And sure enough, he had a major fall from grace. The newspapers were full of the scandal, and I think, I'm sure he was put in jail, but I don't know how long he stayed there. But the point is that even if you get to 9.5, you can go back down to 0. And that's what I saw happen with this particular guru. And he had a huge following, but it didn't do him any good in the end. So the point, of course, that these first 9 aura levels are very they're not very well defined to the extent that this is just the beginning. You're climbing up the mountain, and if the mountain, I take that back, and instead of mountain, let's talk about a rounded top but steep hill. And if you're climbing up a hill, the 3 stages are seen. And the first stage is, of course, the foot of the hill, which is relatively easy to climb up. In fact, you don't really need steps. It is steps in the sense of steps carved into the side of the hillside. You just walk up the slopes of the lower slopes of the hill. And that's what it feels like when you're going from 0 to 5. But then when you come to 5, the real work begins. And 5 to 9 is a slog. It's hard work. And the 9 to 10 graduation, the graduation to go from level 9 to level 10 is, I would say, 10 times more difficult than the graduation to go from 4 to 5. Hawkins talks about this being a logarithmic scale, and I tend to agree that each level is a whole new ball game. Each level is like starting all over again, and if you're lucky enough to move from 5 to 9, then you have an equally difficult task to graduate from 9 to 10, or 10 times more difficult task to graduate from 9 to 10 as you had when you went from 4 to 5. And the question is, what is different? Is there a particular chakra? And the answer is yes. From 0 to 5, you were addressing the emotions, and you were working with the emotions and how to control them. From 5 to 9, you were working with the intellect. You could use the word thinking. You were working with your thinking, especially at 5, 6, 7. But at 8 and 9, you're definitely working with the intellect. And the difference being that the intellect is when you clearly see yourself thinking and you can control it. And at 9, you do get control of your thought process, or at least significant control compared to before. So what happens at 10? what happens in this graduation from 9 to 10. And what I feel is that 9 gives you insight, but it is only 10 that gives you intuition. And what is the difference between insight and intuition? And at least my definitions, and there are a lot of definitions out there, is I'm using insight for a purely intellectual process, whereas intuition is a more balanced personality, where you have been able to balance what you learned about controlling your emotions at 5, and what you learned about controlling your thoughts at 9. If you can combine these two, that's how you graduate to 10. In other words, it's a real holistic change that you're being asked to make. And earlier, when we were unthinking, below 5, perhaps we were mostly ruled by our emotions, and the emotions pulled us this way and that way. And then later on we became more disciplined human beings and began to use thought. But then thought also was totally an uncontrolled force, and has to be controlled, and you finally win control at 9. And that gives you a disciplined thought process. So disciplining the emotions, disciplining the thought process are the two big breakthroughs, but they lead to the third big breakthrough, or the biggest breakthrough, which is realization. And if 0 to 5 was difficult, 5 to 10 is much more difficult. And but graduating from 10 is a watershed event. And I'm using the word watershed, means that getting over the top is difficult, but also, strangely enough, once you graduate to 10, you can never go below 10. Or at least I have never seen it happen. 10 is like a safety net or a stopping point. And even if you go to 14 and you start falling, you can only fall to 10. And then you restart your efforts again. So that is the saving grace of 10. 10 is a watershed event. The third very difficult transition, so there are 3 difficult transitions. The first is 4 to 5. The second is 9 to 10. And the third difficult transition is from 14 to 15. And obviously, the third transition is maybe 100 times more difficult than the second transition. And that's just a guess. The idea I'm trying to convey is that it is really very difficult. In fact, my thesis, or at least I claim that it's not possible to do it without a guru. In fact, even to go from 11 to 12 is, I would say, difficult or impossible to do without a guru. These are such great leaps that they can't be called steps anymore. It's more like jumping up over a cliff, and you need a lot of training, but you also need the Guru's direction and helping hand to surmount these cliffs, and really the steps turn into cliffs now, because now you're at the steepest part of the hill climb, when you have to, where you need those steps cut into the slope. It's difficult. So again, when you make this third transition from 14 to 15, it is a watershed event, because you can't go back. And of course, this third event, I compare it as being sucked in by a black hole and being spat out at the other end by a white hole in a white universe, undifferentiated universe. And of course, there are several implications here. One is that once you go from 14 to 15, you can't go below 15 again. So for example, if you graduate from 15 to 20 or 21, you can slide back down to 15, but you can't go below 15. And so I call it as a major watershed event. And so these are the three big transitions: from 4 to 5, from 9 to 10, and from 14 to 15. And each one of these transitions, each one of these big transitions, has different qualities and require different skills. And some of these skills are simply not available without a guru. Because the guru gives you more than just direction, meaning it's not that the guru gives you the right books to read or talks to you about the right things. The guru, and in my case Sardama, gave me what I call as spiritual energy. I don't think that the time I spent with her was important from the angle of what she said during those precious hours. I think that it was the energy she was giving me during that time that was more influential in changing me, or in giving me the strength to cross those divides. And I suspect that she helped me go from 9 to 10, certainly from 11 to 12, which is a big one again, and definitely from 14 to 15, which is the biggest one of them all, the toughest one of them all. So I hope I've not ended up confusing you, because in their own way each level is different and difficult in its own way. But the ones that I seem to remember especially are 5, 10, and 15. So, I do want to go back to my S curve. I do want to compare the climbing to climbing up a round top hill. And of course, when you are in the lowlands or at the foot of the hill, what you see is almost meadow-like, sloping slightly upwards, and one isn't intimidated. It seems like a pleasant stroll up the hillside, and it is. It doesn't require a lot of effort, and that is 0 to 5. But then once you pass 5, things become tougher. I would say that things become tougher, but the really tough part is between 8 and 12. I think this is the steepest part of the hill. 8 to 12. 9 is difficult, 10 is difficult, 12 is difficult. So I would say there are 3 difficult steps in this steepest part of the S curve, in the steepest part of the hill. And if you can cover these 3 difficult steps, which are all very steep, then you succeed. But you are given a final challenge, and I don't know a lot about the mountain called Everest, but there is some final challenge very close to the top. For some reason I remember it as being Hillary Steps or something of that kind. And that's some kind of choke point. Everybody seems to get stuck there. And that, of course, is the transition from 14 to 15. It's like you're given one last challenge in the steep part. And if you overcome this challenge, you're on the top of the S curve. That means the rounded top of the S curve. And again, what you see in front of you is a meadow, rising very slightly. And you can pretty much stroll from 15 to 16 and 16 to 17, 17 to 18, all the way to 21. And it just gets easier and easier because now you are on the top. And the top of the hill is 20. 21 is some kind of excited state. It's like standing on the top of the hill and planting your flag, or taking that last step on the last rock, the very highest point, which you find at the summit. But anyway, the point is that to go from 15 to 21 is again a relatively easy task. So the problem, of course, begins at 5 and seems to end at 15. Between 5 and 15 you are climbing the steepest part of the hill. And this steepest part of the hill has certain challenges. The first challenge is 9. The second challenge is definitely 10. The third challenge is 12. And the last big challenge is 14. But once you're through these challenges, it's relatively easy. Of course, all this assumes that you can do this in one lifetime. And I would suggest that it is possible, but with the help of a guru, with the help of somebody who can give you spiritual force. And I'm pointing to a picture of my guru, Sardama, who you can see over my left shoulder. There's a picture of her on the wall, and of course I discuss my time with her, my precious time with her in the book. And I have no illusions whatsoever that I personally did not have the strength, nor the skill, nor the humility to understand and work with these concepts till I met her. And I had only, I don't know, maybe 3 personal meetings with her, and that's all it takes. Of course, spread over many years. But best of luck to you. And the best way to find a guru is to develop humility. If you have that inner humility, in other words, if you are ready to listen, understand, analyze, change yourself as a result of this analysis process, then the guru comes, because the guru is looking for a good student, not just an average student, and you want to be that good student. Thank you.